So now that we have discussed the octet rule and we know whether an atom will be gaining or losing electrons to get to a full octet, to have those 8 valence electrons, we can now look at whether or not, when we do so, either gain or lose electrons, our atom will be positive overall, or if it will be negative overall. So this is the question we are looking at in this video. But before we determine whether or not gaining or losing will be positive or negative, we need to remember that before we add or lose electrons, protons equals the number of electrons. And that when protons equals electrons, so your positive equals your negative, you will have no charge. However, when we start to gain or lose electrons, that is when we get a charge. So when we are thinking about whether it will be positive or negative, we need to remember what charge electrons have. So electrons are negative particles. So we need to keep that in mind when we are gaining and losing electrons. So let's look at our first example that we did in the last video. We know oxygen has 6 valence electrons because it is found right here in that 6 column. And so we decided on the last video that it is gaining 2 electrons. So we'll just add them in right there. And so if we're adding on electrons, and electrons are negative, we now have more electrons than protons. So we have more negative than positive. And so that means that our overall charge is going to be negative because we have more electrons, more negative. When we lose electrons, so we know sodium has 1 valence electrons because it was found in the column with 1 valence electron, so goodbye electron, we are getting rid of negative, and so electrons are less than the number of protons. We have more positive. And so when we have more positive than we do negative, our overall charge will be positive because we have more protons. And so the big takeaway from here is that when we're gaining electrons, abbreviate electrons, the overall charge will be negative. When we are losing electrons, our overall charge will be positive.